everyone, and welcome to another discussion in the Living Liturgy Forum. And in a few days' time, we're going to begin Advent, and we all know a great deal about Advent. It's the season that we all like because it's getting ready for Christmas, and there's that thought of, Christmas is coming, the goose is getting fat, there's going to be presents, and there's also going to be holidays. It's slightly different this year because we don't know whether Christmas is going to be cancelled or what will happen. But it's also useful for us as liturgists and people responsible for the liturgy to actually reflect, what do we really think about Advent? What's uppermost in our mind? And is what's uppermost in our mind what's most useful? So with me to get this seminar off the ground is Kevin McGinnell. He's up in Luton, and then just inside the M25 is Patricia Rumsey in Arkley. And Kevin, there's a strange thing about Advent. It's the only time in the liturgy when the poor relation, the Old Testament, is actually the theme setter. Would you like to pick that up for us?
I think that's a really lovely way to begin, because it's all about promise, hope. Those words, I think, are the crucial words. I've got a slide that James might show you from a couple of the Roman documents, and those words that we're pushed to think about are preparation, remembrance, waiting, conversion, joyful hope. Now, you may not be able to read all of these, but one of the things I'd say is that occasionally when you go into documents like this one on the universal norms, and that other amazing document, the Directory on Popular Piety and Liturgy, they do take up what you were saying, Tom, that they synthesize the idea that we have a season of waiting. You can see from the second part, it's a waiting of memory, a waiting of supplication, conversion, and joyful hope. And the one thing that Advent isn't, it's not Lent. That I think some of us may have grown up with that thing that we've got these two quasi-penitential seasons, Lent, Advent. We need to move away definitely to take up what you've got in that first quotation there, that Advent isn't about penitence, rather it's about preparation, remembrance, which is the Old Testament for us, is remembrance. But for itself, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Testament, would be a devout and expectant delight. They were waiting for what we have, in a sense, have in our grasp. So those, and there's obviously got the lovely, joyful expressions of so many of the Old Testament Psalms that we use as well. So that would be my starting point. No, don't look at Lent. Keep Lent well out of your picture. Hit Advent with hope.
And of course, once this word memory is actually crucial, because for us, memory is something past. The dreadful undergraduate 2 years ago who had his first original thought and said to me, you realize that everything in history is over, and that meant it was irrelevant. But memory within Christianity is actually future directed, because how should you translate anamnesis? Anamnesis is experiencing anew. And if we think of memory as experiencing anew, we realize that we remember in order to move forward. Memory is actually, I'm remembering something today because I want to experience it anew now as part of my getting ready for the future. And I think that's where we sometimes get lost in our notion, that we think it's just what happened back then. And that raises then a question about how we read something like the prophet Isaiah. Do we read the prophet Isaiah merely as a sort of a game? hey, this was predicted, it happened, boom. And it's sort of 25 predictions, 25 fulfillments, and hey presto, that proves that Jesus must be it. That reduces divine revelation down to some sort of magical trick. The gospel writers weren't engaged in, they deliberately reframed the story in terms of the expectation from memory. This was to fulfill, this was to fulfill. It's not a case of, you know, do you know what number I'm going to pull out of the hat? And then you pull the right number out of the hat. It's, if you want to understand this event, then go back and read Isaiah. We can only make sense of what we are celebrating in Jesus insofar as we actually read the scripture, read what for Jesus were the scriptures.
So I think that's a lovely thing, because as you were talking now, I was saying, perhaps for Advent, we ought to try and say, how did Isaiah feel about what he was saying, because it hadn't happened? Take John the Baptist. He says, the one's going to come is going to baptize you with the Holy Spirit, but he didn't know what it would look like, what it would feel like. And Mary is a classic case. Mary is sitting there pondering and treasuring all those things, that lovely phrase you've got in Luke. But she's not certain how it's going to turn out. When Simeon says a sword will pierce your heart, that's not a reality for her yet. She doesn't know what it will actually mean. And I was listening today to the radio about, you know, us waiting for a vaccine now. I don't want to get into too much of that, but we don't know how it will turn out. We're waiting for people to make sure it will be okay for us to take this vaccine. We don't know what Christmas will be like this year for the first time ever, because normally I think many of us in parishes pull out what we did last year and do it again, God forbid. But this year we don't even know if we're going to be in church. So I think you're absolutely right. We've got to go into the mind of the people who hadn't experienced what we know happened to fulfill what they were talking about.
And that means often that Advent means we have to go into awkward places. It's quite frightening if you go around churches when you could go around churches on a Sunday morning, and the number of places where the reading from the Old Testament was just ditched. I wrote a piece recently in Anaphora, and I gave it in a thing that you organised down in London. Do you remember there near the British Library, you organised a meeting a few years ago to discuss the script, discuss the lectionary. And one of the things that I noted, I wrote it up in that paper, and we can send round a PDF of that paper, was the number of clergy who have said to me over the years, I don't know why we bother reading the Old Testament. Let's ditch the Old Testament. Well, and I can see that on a summer Sunday morning, a long reading from Deuteronomy is often at the very limits of what we can interpret. But the problem with something like Advent is Advent actually forces us back to think about, if we want to understand God being present in Jesus, we have to think about God being present in the law, God being present in the prophets, God being present in the tent, the tabernacle. And I don't mean the reservation box. I mean the actual tabernacle in the desert, and then the new home of the tabernacle, whether it's in Shiloh or in Jerusalem. Now, that's an area of our memory that, particularly for Catholic Christians, is almost alien. If you ask a group of Catholics, what does Shiloh mean? Those over 50 think it's the name of the ranch that the Virginian lived on. And that's you know, whereas in West Wales, if you say to Shiloh, what does Shiloh mean? Oh, Shiloh, that's the name of the chapel up the hill. There's about, I'm living in West Wales, and there's at least a dozen chapels around here named Shiloh Tabernacle. But this idea that God is present in the very life of the community is what the presence of Shiloh is about in our memory. God is present at the heart of the people is the notion of the temple. God is speaking in the challenges being made to the people is the idea of God being present in the prophets. God being present in a way of life for the people is God is present in the law. And these are presences which we need to understand the presence in the Christ. And yet this is the only time of the year when we will actually get readings that will focus on them.
I think for me, one of the greatest phrases in the Old Testament is that I will be your God, you will be my people. And
the Shiloh.
Yeah, the very, very presence. And I think it's hugely important that people, I think we can be, this is why it's very interesting to the recent death of Jonathan Sacks brings back so much that he taught that is so useful for us, because he was constantly about this very presence of God to the people and the presence of the people to God, and that intertwining, that sort of interlacing of it constantly. So when you get that lovely phrase in, you know, console my people, I mean, that there's something powerful there about God sending consolation. Rejoice, O Jerusalem. You know, well, why would you rejoice if you hadn't got a God to rejoice in that was your God? And I think I go back to this question about, you know, the Ignatian thing about putting yourself in the presence of whatever you're talking about. What did those people feel? We've got, in a sense, the problem that we know what's coming, like you said earlier on. They sat there in expectant hope. And to that virtue of hope is something we really need more of.
Well, can I just pick you up on, you mentioned the late Jonathan Sacks, and this raises a very interesting question about our liturgy. The primary place of Jewish liturgy is not the synagogue, it's the home. Now, we have almost ignored that whole aspect of liturgy. It's become sort of the world of popular piety. But this year, I know several old people who will, even if the churches are open, they won't be able to get to the church building. And this raises another aspect about Jewish liturgy that we need to rediscover, and that is that the home is a place of liturgy. And I suspect one of the challenges that we'll face, I noticed looking at there's an awful lot of people who lead liturgy have joined us this morning, that one of the challenges that will face us this year as people who lead and teach liturgy will be to help people not to have a good experience in the church, because that building may be off limits, or it may be off limits to particular groups, but to help people to preside at their own liturgies in the house. And for instance, anyone who's yesterday evening, if you know, we're speaking on a Saturday morning, the Shabbat meal last night in a Jewish household is a place of formal liturgy, and people just experience it. And yet, one of the problems we have is that if someone says, "Well, let's have grace at the Christmas dinner," giggle, 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 embarrassment. We actually have a Jonathan Sacks. I remember memorably said that it is precisely because Jewish liturgy is focused in the home that Judaism is sure of its next generation. And I think we're actually embarrassed often in Christian households if we think we're engaging in liturgy. You know that famous bit in Bart Simpson when they invite the local pious God botherer in for dinner, and Bart says, and then Marge decides she's going to say grace, and Bart bursts out just as any 7-year-old would, "Hey, we don't do this every day. Why are we doing it?" And then Bart memorably comes out with what must be one of the most elegant graces ever written. Rub-a-dub-dub, thanks for the grub.
Yeah.
So this year, if we're going to talk about remembering, and we're going to talk about the domestic church, we actually have to be trying to help people to celebrate in their households.
I mean, that very word remember, and you went back to Annalise earlier on, it is about making memory real rather than something in the past. I mean, you know, I grew up with a good Mayo mother, and we had a really big water font on, you know, holy water font on the way in and out of the house. And if you didn't use it as you got more and more teenage, you got sprinkled with it as you went out. But when I lived near Golders Green, and as you see it in any Jewish neighbourhood, the Metzua on the front of everybody's house is a sign that as you go in and as you come out, you remember who you are, part of the people of God. And it gives you the hope to live as that.
And of course, you would have heard in Mayo, as I heard in Dublin, that when you actually lit candles at Christmas time, the old invocation was, "God give us the light of heaven."
Yeah.
That's a good point to move the discussion on to Patricia, because you actually are going to talk about, you have got a piece of domestic liturgical kit beside you.
I have, yeah. There it is. I don't know whether you can all see it, but it's here. I can't get the laptop to look at it, but that's better. You see that?
Yeah.
Right. 4 purple candles and a wreath of greenery. The greenery, the roundness, the circle representing eternity, and the greenery representing life, and the 4 candles for the 4 weeks of Advent. Purple, the colour of Advent. We'll forget it's the colour of Lent as well at the moment. And we light the candle. We light one candle at the beginning of Vespers, on first Vespers of each Sunday in Advent. That's the Saturday evening. For the beginning of Advent, we have a blessing. We bless the wreath and light the candles, and incorporate that into Vespers, the evening prayer of the church. And then every day during Advent, we light the one candle for that week at Lord's morning prayer and Vespers evening prayer. And it's reminding us of the light of Christ coming into the world. And next week we have 2 candles, and then we have 3 candles, and then we have 4 candles.
And Kevin, I know you want to issue a word of warning.
Well, I've got 2 things about the wreath actually. One is that historically, we believe it's sort of medieval probably, but it began with 24 candles, 1 for each day of Advent, just in a row. Then it grew into that wreath in that sense of eternity and symbols. But I might be shot down by somebody here, but there is the heresy of the white candle in the middle, the so-called Christmas candle, because that goes against what we've just been saying. Advent and the wreath symbolises those 4 weeks of Advent. Once we've lit the 4th candle and finished that week, however long it may be, the wreath gives way to the crib in that sense, because the wreath has prepared us. It's a sign of hope. But I got really shot down at a recent teachers group, because obviously the commercially produced Advent wreaths now all have the space for a 5th candle, because it means they can sell more candles, I suggest.
And someone has just asked a question, what about the pink one? Well, the problem with the pink one is that any symbol that gets overloaded with detail, being a symbol, and it becomes a teacher's aid. And wearing pink vestments is just adding extra confusion. In a day, in the pre-1970 liturgy, it really had, one of the problems with the liturgy was that it had become a series of codes to be decoded. But the moment you decode a code, you have to decode the decoding, and you end up in an intellectually in a game that's more like crossword puzzle than celebration. So it has to be kept as simple. Any symbol that gets overly complex becomes a teacher's aid, and that's why it has to. That's why we have to keep things simple. And that's equally the reason for why a cleric going off on a monologue on the third Sunday of Advent explaining Rose vestments is actually distracting from the message of waiting and going off into secondary and tertiary and quaternary ideas.
It is the only day when priests get complimented on their vestments, though, Tom.
Yeah, well, maybe God, Kevin, I'll send you a bottle of whiskey if you need some support on the third Sunday of Advent. That's really.
The one thing I would say is that I try at all possible to use the bluest form of purple for the whole of Advent, so that the purple of Lent is different. I think we need to keep on going back to these things about clarity of symbol without complexity, and I think sometimes or other we've got ourselves into a bit of a mix. But if I can just show you one slide which preempts the crib bit, but it was just something I found from Pope Francis recently. I don't know whether you can see this, but it's the next slide, please, Tom, James.
It's up.
This one. This really struck me. Francis wrote a little thing on the crib last year, but if you just look at the text, he quotes Celano about Francis of Assisi's first crib, and he says, when Francis arrived, he'd asked for a crib to be built. He found a manger full of hay, an ox and a donkey. All those present experienced a new and indescribable joy in the presence of the Christmas scene. But there is only the empty manger and the donkey. And so the priest celebrates the Eucharist, showing the bond between the incarnation of God and the Eucharist. At Greccia, there were no statues. The nativity scene was enacted and experienced by all who were present. I don't want to preempt the crib discussion next time, but there is a sense in which once the wreath has gone out of the way, we have to become the presence. Does that make sense, Tom? We have to inhabit the crib.
If incarnation doesn't transform us, it hasn't taken place.
And that's why I think doing anything more with the wreath and letting it talk about Advent drags us into another. Well, I think it just drags us away from the meaning of the wreath.
Yeah. Is there anyone here who'd like to come in on this? Because it strikes me that one of the issues we have is that this year we are facing new challenges of communication, which maybe have been there for a long time, but only this year are we aware of them.
May I say something? It's Duncan Aitkins here. What about the message for young children, those who are now being bombarded by the secular world, especially at Christmas, and may not have the opportunity of going to church to celebrate Christmas in the normal way? what do you suggest we can do as perhaps a Catholic family during Advent?
Well, a very obvious reply to that is to start off with something like the Advent wreath, and so mark the time out as religious time rather than just counting down to Advent. The counting down to Christmas. If you look at the secular Advent calendar that you can buy in any stationery shop, the idea is, you've only 3 more days to wait, and then comes the presents, or then comes the chocolates. But actually, trying to create an alternative sense of time using something like the Advent wreath. We're now on the 2nd Sunday. We're now on the 3rd Sunday. We're now on the 4th Sunday. We are going through this period of waiting, and we're deliberately waiting. And that's one very obvious way. Another obvious way is to actually place the crib there empty and let that be the fulfillment. Fundamental to Christian prayer is, of course, prayer together. It doesn't have to be a community like Patricia's gathers several times a day to pray together. A simpler way is every community of Christians can gather together to pray, and you just have to use the Lord's Prayer and notice that it's phrased completely in the plural. It's not a private prayer.
I think another thing.
Yeah, Kevin.
And no, another thing in that is, I mean, for a start, if you straight away as you move to the Our Father, you've got Thy Kingdom Come. We're about that, the waiting. But certainly, one of the things we worked because of this, the God Who Speaks project. They produced last year in our diocese a series of Advent scripture cards, one for each day, so that you would have a phrase for the day. You can do that yourself. Just go to the lectionary and take, as Tom was saying, any of the words of the Old Testament or the Gospel of that day and make it your Advent phrase. It just gives, because you need to give children, I think, a word or two or a phrase, and they can build up something from that, really. In the same way that you do get these candles as well, don't you, which are 24 days, and you just like it's that sense of expectation and hope, but not for the presents. That's, although they're lovely.
Kevin, you have a series of different prayers, blessing prayers for the Advent wreath, haven't you?
We do, yes, yeah.
Can we put them up on the website so that they're there for people?
Yeah, we've got an Advent resource thing, which has got a different prayer for each time you light the Advent wreath and that sort of thing. I can send it over to you straight away, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll put a link to your site on the site of this group.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, if anyone has ideas, please send them to us so that we can circulate them around. Hey, there's someone down there putting up their hand. Virginia Saldana.
Yes, I'm Virginia Saldana from India. I would like to come in because I've done liturgy a lot in my parish, and now we are a group of women theologians who are preparing liturgy. We are in lockdown still in India. So I thought that, since you said a word, and young people are more interested in going into context, in reality, I thought that, each day could be, each Sunday could be like waiting. So, we could reflect on the concept of waiting. Like you said, the memory to move forward. Then conversion. What do we need to convert today? What is, I think we can even look at what's happening around us in the world, whether we look at, sort of the environment, whether we look at the situation today you know, whether it's political, whether it's economical. So what requires conversion? For me, I would say, like, what would Jesus be saying to us today? And then hope. What is the hope we can give our world today? And the last could be, just before Christmas, how do we become the crib? And incarnation into life today. Incarnate Jesus into our world today. How do we become Jesus to the world? So these could be 4 Sundays. And I think young people could come up with fantastic, you know, sort of suggestions themselves if we help them to, you know, sort of look into these areas.
Thank you.
I'm looking just to see if there anyone else waving up their hand in front of me. Or
Anne Moynihan's mentioned a Facebook page.
okay, Anne.
The name on the chat. Do you want to say something, Anne?
Oh, Anne, you'll have to press the unmute button, which is down in the bottom left-hand corner.
Yeah.
There you are.
Lovely. I've noticed coming up on Facebook there are quite a lot of ideas. There's a particular page called Church, Christmas and COVID. It's a bit Anglican, some of it's a bit evangelical, but among that there are streams of quite good stuff for families. What we're doing is encouraging people to have their own Advent candles, Advent wreaths at home, doing an Advent service on Facebook. The Sunday school, again, I'm still in an Anglican parish, the Sunday school is running Facebook Sunday school full of Advent. We're kind of keeping it going. And yeah, I can see that not everybody's on Facebook, but you know, people have parish websites. Presumably newsletters are still being produced. There's nothing to stop anybody putting forward the, you know, how to make an Advent wreath, some blessing prayers, some things for each of the Sundays. It means somebody's got to do it, but we can produce, you know, an A4 sheet for every family in the parish, something like that. I've got this really nice little book that is in reverse, keeping Advent and Christmas time. It's a small, tiny little LTP book. I've just had a look on their website. I can't see that particular book, but there's stacks of family Advent resources. And it is a bit late to be getting on, you know, getting on Amazon and ordering books, but there's stacks of stuff on the internet. But it means somebody coordinating it.
Well, one of the things that I think it's important for us to pick up this year is that for many people, the Advent wreath is something they only see in church, and it becomes one more thing that's up there on the stage. It's far away. But the very nature of having a sense of waiting is that it has to be something that's close to you. So this is an ideal year to be saying, everyone have an Advent wreath in your own home. It's not just something for the big stage. It's something that you actually have in some place in your, it's part of this domestic liturgy. Paul Moynihan, I see you, can you draw attention to what you've just put up on the chat line?
Thanks, Tom. Yes, the American Federation of Artists and Liturgy Commissions publish some very useful resources, and one they've just produced is dealing with the whole of the Advent and Christmas season in a variety of circumstances, be it parish, be it convent, be it school. Worth a look. The link's there.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can't see Sue.
No, Tom.
Hi.
Okay.
I'm just taken by thinking about the Advent wreath. I am the only religious person in my family, and I have grandchildren, and this will be the case for many, many people. And we have to do the best that we can. We can't go hitting them over the head with a hammer with things. That doesn't attract. But for a very small thing, and it's a very small little contribution here, I suddenly got the idea of, many years I have had an Advent wreath, and I used to make them in school regularly with children. But what about when I have our family Zoom sessions at 5 o'clock on a Sunday? Rather than do it from the sofa, we do it from the table, and there is an Advent wreath there just sitting on the table, quietly there for children to actually look at and say, "What's that, Granny? What's that about?" That's just my little contribution.
No, I was just...
Sorry, Kevin.
But no, I was just thinking something, that's a really good idea, because there was an article in the paper recently that because of COVID and everything else, the Christmas story, the whole nativity play issue, and I must admit some nativity plays I've heard of are quite weird, but schools are not using the nativity, not having nativity plays this year. So that thing about how do you help people who don't know the story to actually ask the question what's happening would be really useful. So I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and also I think, Sue, we can talk about mission, we can talk about evangelization, but actually the situation you're in, that is the reality of evangelization for most people, not just for. Hey, Simon Fisher wanted to get in. Simon, I can't see your button, but anyway, can you oh, there you are. Hi, Simon.
You got me okay. I just had what Sue said was what I was going to say, but I had another idea and a thought. The thing is that I've got 3 adult children in the family, and this is not uncommon, where a lot of the children don't leave home or they come back to home, especially at a time like this. And so a thought occurred to me: if you can't get an Advent candle in time, I've got a keen artist in the family, my youngest daughter. I'm going to ask her to draw us an Advent candle, and then we can then paint little fires on each one as the week, that goes on each candle as its time comes up. There was just a thought that might be helpful for those who can't get hold of an Advent calendar for the home. The other thing that helps is my wife is terrified of fire, so having an Advent candle that's actually lit is something she couldn't manage. That's my contribution.
I think everyone's got to do what fits. I mean, even creating the Advent wreath can, people say it's very difficult, but it's basically 4 candles stuck in something and decorated with greenery. We need to make these. I think it's Paul VI talks about the home is the school of prayer, and that's got to be domestic prayer. Because there's another, isn't there an Irish tradition, Tom, of on Christmas Eve you have a candle lit in the window?
Yeah, yes, yes, that is this idea that there is a welcome there for the for the visiting Holy Family, and it's lit in the window that faces the road. By the way, the simplest way to build an Advent wreath is to get 4 ordinary flower pots and put a candle in the flower pot, because you just put the soil around the candle, and then into that you shove the bits of holly, because that allows you then to create a wreath without any wires or any technical things. But Maria Grace Sophie has been waving her hand. Okay, can you unmute and come in?
Hi. Basically, I don't know if many of you have heard of The Chosen. You probably have, and it's like an adaptation or a series of the life of Christ. But they did a pilot episode called The Shepherd, which is of the Nativity, and it's so good. And they bring in in the creation of it, they brought in I think an Orthodox priest and a Catholic priest and an evangelical Protestant evangelical person. So it's pretty sound, and I just recommend it, maybe slightly older children. Yeah, it's really good, or anyone really, if you just an idea.
Can you send us a link?
Yeah,
we'll put it on the website.
Sure.
I'm aware that time is moving on. And there is no, the problem with anything to do with liturgy is that there's no end to what we're doing. Liturgy liturgy is a doing. And so the talking about it, the only proof that the talking is of any use is that it leads to better doing. So it's been great that we've been able to come together here on Zoom this morning. We're going to come together again next Saturday within hours of the beginning of Advent. But all I can say is I hope that what we've been talking about this morning has somehow stimulated your thoughts, and more importantly, it'll stimulate you to moving onwards. We'll try and put as much stuff as you send us on the website, and I hope that that will prove useful. Kevin, would you like to wrap up?
Yes, so somebody's asked if they're going to, if we can send them the website address. I know James will do that. You can put it into chat even if it's possible. It struck me as we were thinking that one of the things I don't know, but one of the things we may be missing this year will be the singing of carols. And I just thought, not quite a bit of homework, but if you look at some of the carols, they are absolutely amazing. In their Old Testament references, just go to Hark the Herald Angels Sing. You have to be careful of some of the carols that are a bit imaginative, if you'd like to put it like that. But I think it'd be good, since we're not going to sing them, perhaps just to look at them. And going back to what Duncan was asking, you see that the words of the carols are there for, in our memory. It's the one thing you'll get people to sing whether you like it or not. And perhaps we ought to sit down and say, what's the word of a carol that will lead us to Christmas? Because there are Advent carols compared to Christmas carols. So it's just a thought, really.
And maybe we should make that a topic for next Saturday.
We could look at that, indeed, yes, yeah. I'll try and get that resource pack we've got for Advent, and we can put it on our website, Tom. That'd be okay as well.
Yeah. The more we'll try and make our website a sort of a spaghetti junction. It'll lead you into it and lead you out to other places, so that that you can use it as a.
Sorry, James has put the website address up on the chat for everybody.
Well, listen,
so that's been a very helpful session.
Yeah, it's been great seeing you all. Would that we could all actually meet, but there you are. It's lovely to know that from West Wales to India, we have the body of Christ gathered in this little session.